In this lecture, we're going to find out what the leading cause of death is in Canada, and you will be surprised by the result. And yes, I'll admit, this is a depressing topic, but by the end of the lecture, my hope, my intention, is that you will have an entirely new perspective and feel empowered about your personal health. Now, if you keep up with the news, you've probably heard that cancer is number one. The big C word. And perhaps you're already aware of those awful numbers I'm about to talk about. Close to 1 out of every 2 Canadians will be told one day that they have cancer. There's an over 25% lifetime probability of dying from cancer, and there are over 75,000 Canadians that lose their life to cancer each year. It's been estimated that the cost of cancer to the Canadian economy will average close to $39 billion a year for the next 30 years. But is cancer truly the number one cause of death in Canada? No, it isn't. And you will find out why when we revisit the rankings in a few moments. But first, let's move on to cardiovascular disease. And again, if you are into statistics, cardiovascular disease is reported to be the number 2 cause of death. And you'll notice I put a question mark on this one also. There are 70,000 deaths each year from cardiovascular disease, and this includes heart attacks and strokes. Every 7 minutes, a Canadian dies from cardiovascular disease. And perhaps the most shocking statistic, 90% of Canadians, including school children, are already at some risk for heart attack or stroke. The economic burden of cardiovascular disease is around $23 billion a year. And what about diabetes? Type 2 diabetes has seen a 70% increase in the last 10 years. Now, diabetes itself does not typically lead to death, but the complications associated with diabetes are quite deadly, such as heart disease and kidney failure. 30% of Canadians that die each year from other chronic diseases have diabetes. Diabetes has been called one of the most challenging health problems of the 21st century. So many children today are developing what we used to refer to as adult onset diabetes. So today, we instead refer to it as type 2 diabetes. We can't call it an adult disease anymore. And in many cases, diabetes goes unreported. It is estimated that 700,000 Canadians have diabetes but don't know it. Canada ranks 15th out of 17 countries on mortality due to diabetes. Only the US is worse. The economic burden of diabetes in Canada is over $12 billion. So it seems that Canadians are spending a lot of money on chronic disease, but getting very little in return. And the cost of disease isn't just measured in dollars. Visiting a hospital and witnessing the suffering that goes on should light a fire in all of us so that we start demanding better results. Now let's review the ranking. Number 1, we said, was cancer. Number 2, cardiovascular disease. And diabetes is up there contending strongly for a top spot. Now I'm going to perform a little exercise that I learned how to do from Dr. Colin Campbell. And by the end of this exercise, we will have a revised ranking and a better perspective on the leading causes of death. Let's begin the exercise by looking at number 1, cancer. Scientists today tell us that about 97% of cancers are due to lifestyle and environment, with diet being the most important factor. But how much cancer can diet alone prevent? Big health organizations such as the National Academy of Sciences and the National Cancer Institute tell us that 1/3 of all cancers are preventable just through the foods we choose to eat. But scientists that have studied cancer for decades believe that proper nutrition can easily prevent more than twice this amount. After all, a proper plant-based diet has been shown to not only help prevent, but also reverse cancer. But for the purpose of this exercise, I want to stick to very conservative numbers. So even though the evidence clearly shows a much higher percentage, let's just say that 1/3 of cancers would not occur if we simply ate better foods. In Canada, this would mean 25,167 less deaths each year from cancer. Let's put that 25,167 under a new column and we'll call this column the deaths due to ignoring nutrition column. Now let's look at number 2, cardiovascular disease. And I know what many of you are thinking. You're thinking that at least 90% of cardiovascular deaths can be avoided through proper diet. But for people that are still in the dark on these issues, let's again remain conservative and say that only 50% of cardiovascular deaths would be avoided if we just ate the right kinds of food. So let's move that number over to the deaths due to ignoring nutrition column. And now let's look at diabetes. In Canada, it is estimated that 90 to 95% of cases of diabetes are type 2, meaning that they are preventable. Studies have shown us how in just a few weeks on a proper plant-based diet, people with diabetes can reverse this disease and stop all of their medications. Easily, over 90% of deaths from diabetes would not occur if we made better food choices. When it comes to diabetes, prevention is a no-brainer. But let's be conservative again and say just 50% of diabetes deaths can be prevented with a proper diet, which means 3,600 fewer deaths. Place this number under the deaths due to ignoring nutrition column, and now let's add these numbers up. We have a total of 63,767 deaths from diseases that are nutritionally controllable. And now if we look at the revised causes of death ranking, nutritionally controllable diseases is number 1, even though we used very conservative numbers. And of course, the same is true for the United States and for other rich countries around the world that are also eating themselves to death. So if we know that the majority of chronic diseases can be prevented with a healthier plant-based diet, why isn't the general public better informed? And why aren't healthcare professionals better educated? The answer is money. The companies in the medical industry that run our system have no financial interest in creating a healthier population. The money is in disease. Let's use an example from Ontario. In 2008, Ontario vowed to tackle one of Canada's biggest health issues, the epidemic of diabetes. The Ontario Diabetes Strategy, ODS, was launched with $742 million in funding. Now remember, 90 to 95% of diabetes is preventable. Now let me ask you a question. Take a guess. How much of the $742 million was spent on prevention? The answer is 3%. So where did the rest of the money go? Where did 97% of your taxpayer money go when it was supposed to go into prevention of a disease that is so simple to prevent? It went where it normally goes, into the pockets of the people and the companies that run our disease care system. A 2012 report of Ontario's Auditor General found the program to be highly unsuccessful. It turned out that since the program had been launched, hospitalization rates for diabetes patients had increased. More Ontarians were overweight, and more diabetes-related infections, ulcers, and amputations occurred in hospitals. Again, thanks to your taxpayer money. This is a perfect example of how our North American disease care system works. The establishment has no real interest in preventing disease. The focus is always on how to treat people after they've been diagnosed, because that's where the money is. And we don't even treat the root cause of the disease, we just like to manage symptoms, so that patients keep coming back, just like businesses have repeat customers. That's how you make profit. Prevention and health in the current model cannot be priorities. How could they be when they don't make sense financially for the companies that hold the largest stakes in healthcare? And these are the same companies that make the rules and control the information that the public receives. If prevention was truly important for all of these companies and organizations and governments that control our healthcare system, the statistics shown in this video could change for the better, just like that. But in North America, not only do we not properly educate the public on health issues, but our very own governments even subsidize the very foods that make us sick. That means that our taxpayer money goes into helping to produce foods that are most associated to disease, such as meat and dairy. And then our tax money pays for the increase in healthcare costs as our hospitals get flooded. And what do politicians talk about? With lobbyists to their left and lobbyists to their right? They talk about more money for bigger hospitals, more drugs, more screening, more tests, more surgeries, and more research in the wrong areas. Meanwhile, we're getting sicker. While many of the health organizations and corporations that are supposedly fighting diseases on our behalf are getting larger and richer. Cancer is the best example because it is currently the most lucrative field in medicine. Billions of dollars have been spent on cancer over the past 40 years. And many companies have gotten rich. But we haven't made a dent in defeating this disease. Nor are we living longer with the disease. Anybody that tells you otherwise is either corrupt or easily manipulated by misleading statistics. And we'll cover this in another lecture. But for now, the only statistic that matters is that the number of deaths from cancer in Canada has surpassed that of cardiovascular disease. We are fighting to find a cure, the cancer industry convinces the public. But only if the cure is profitable. It's a disgrace to humanity. And chances are that the way we handle disease in North America will affect or has already affected members of your family, your friends, and perhaps even you. Let me give you a typical example of a journey that many people have taken through our North American disease care system. And it begins when a person eats the wrong kinds of food, gains some excess weight, is diagnosed with diabetes, is given medications for diabetes, along with pills to control blood pressure and cholesterol. A few years later, this person's kidneys begin to fail. And eventually, when continuing down on this very predictable path, death from a heart attack or stroke is likely to occur. And after being treated and medicated for 20 to 30 years, where was this person helped? Through all the doctor visits, screenings, medications, and treatments, where did this person's health improve? This is just another example of a typical victim of our disease care system. And if you've been paying attention, you've just learned that there is a link between all of these chronic diseases, from diabetes to heart disease and even cancer. All of these diseases go together in certain countries, such as Canada and the US. In Ontario, as an example, it is reported that diabetes accounts for 39% of heart attacks, 35% of strokes, 53% of kidney dialysis, and 69% of limb amputations. We also know that diabetics have twice the chances of developing and dying from certain cancers. So the question we have to ask is, why is it that when we have one health issue, when we have one disease such as diabetes, our chances for another disease are highly increased? And the answer is, a chronic disease is a sign that the person is not living a very healthy life, and is therefore vulnerable to having the body break down in a variety of ways. But instead of focusing on diet and lifestyle so that we can build the very foundation of our health, we are fooled into believing that each disease somehow just appears on its own, unrelated to anything we may have done to prevent it. And instead of changing our life to treat the root cause of this disease, we are given drugs to treat the individual symptoms. Treating symptoms does not improve our health. We're just ignoring the real problem until it gets worse. We don't need more drugs. We don't need more treatments that have shown to be not only ineffective but also very dangerous. So dangerous that prescription drugs taken as prescribed in hospitals are the third leading cause of death in North America after cardiovascular disease and cancer. For example, the diabetes drug Avandia was found to dramatically increase the risk of heart attack, and so countries around the world quickly banned it. After all, 2/3 of people with diabetes already die of heart problems. So what sense does it make to take a drug that increases the risk even more? But Health Canada disagrees with this logic. They did not ban the drug, nor did the US. In fact, the same day that the company that makes Avandia settled a $460 million lawsuit with US victims, its stock price went up. And in Canada, it's much harder to win a lawsuit, especially since Health Canada is partners with the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, Health Canada have been heavily criticized for lacking transparency when it comes to the adverse effects of drugs, even withholding information from doctors regarding the dangers of these medications. And so where do doctors turn to for the missing information? They get it from pharmaceutical sales reps. Talk about a conflict of interest. This is so ridiculous that you can't even make it up. But it gets worse. Terence Young, who is the founder and the chair of Drug Safety Canada, tells us that in Ontario, under the current Coroner's Act, all prescription and over-the-counter drug deaths are identified as being natural. So if you take a pill that ends up killing you, we can document that you died of a natural cause. And of course, that's just one way that pharmaceutical companies get away with it. And so now we have a population that just blindly agrees to treat symptoms of one disease with a medication that increases the risks of another disease, including death of course, and the cycle continues. Canadians now spend over $25 billion on prescription drugs. Drugs that do nothing to restore our health. And we start popping these pills at a young age, completely unaware, completely misguided, and without realizing, we find ourselves caught on the path of disease. And that's when you wake up one day and realize that you've transitioned from a healthy person to a patient. But it doesn't have to be this way, because we can choose to get off this path. We can choose, through the actions we take in our daily lives, to do a whole lot better than what the statistics show. We have clear evidence that shows us how we can prevent and reverse diseases, and it begins on our plate. Type 2 diabetes, a condition that can be reversed in just a few weeks on a plant-based diet, and yet people are taking drugs such as Avandia to control this disease, and then they're dying from this medication and other medications like it. Where is the logic in that? And when you think about it, you realize that easily 50% of deaths from prescription medications can also be classified as deaths from nutritionally controllable diseases. Because if we ate better, we would never be in a position to be told to take these dangerous drugs in the first place. With a proper plant-based diet, we can reverse diabetes, naturally lower our cholesterol and blood pressure while reversing cardiovascular disease, and after 40 years of failure, we can finally start winning the war on cancer. And there are no negative side effects. And so I ask you, can any pharmaceutical pill do this? Can you imagine the marketing and the headlines around the world if a pill was created that could give you these results? We would all be on it. But we have this pill already. It's our food. It's not a coincidence that when researchers travel the world from continent to continent looking for the healthiest people on Earth, they found people on plant-based diets, living long to over 100 years old without any of the chronic diseases that we suffer from. So today we must understand that much about our health, and to be honest, more than we sometimes would like to admit, is directly up to us and the type of life we choose to lead. And the single most important thing that we can do is become more conscious. Let's educate ourselves. Let's accept responsibility and enrich our lives in the many ways that we are capable. It is our time and our opportunity to reject the status quo and to demand better from ourselves. Thank you.